We love you, sir.
Not sure if this gets any easier being up here. Am I on? There we go. Well, yesterday, me and my folks went over to Peoria and we got to see Irvin Baxter at one of the churches over there. It's my first time. And he talked about America, God's given destiny. And it was a very powerful conference that they had over there. So we had a great time yesterday with that. If you weren't here for the last lesson, the United States Discovered in the Bible, I encourage you to go back and watch that because tonight we're going to be building off that lesson. And I don't want you to miss out on some of the key information. Now, if you haven't already noticed, Bible prophecy, there's always a lot of history that goes along with it. And that shows that Bible prophecy is true. For those who find history boring, I'm going to do my best to keep it as interesting as possible. So put your thinking caps on. I'm not going to be real long tonight, but we're going to cover a lot of information in a short amount of time. Now, over 2,000 years ago, the Apostle John, he prophesied there was going to be a one world government ruling the entire earth just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. We're going to see absolute proof that the world governing body is already established and how we recognize it. So tonight we're going to be talking about New World Order as simply world government. We're going to be talking about the deadly wound that was healed. I've had several people ask me about that. We're going to talk about that and the true meaning behind that. Now after this lesson, the next one will be Islam and Bible prophecy, just to give you an idea of where we're going next. I'm happy to have my folks here again today. They're my biggest supporters, so I'm going to have my dad stand and just say a word of prayer real quick. All right, we hear the term New World Order more frequently today than ever before. But what is the New World Order? The New World Order is simply world government. However, it's not just any world government. It is the world government of the Antichrist. The world government is being formed right now and is prophesied about in the Bible. Now let's look for a moment at the term New World Order. Believe it or not, it's on the back of your dollar bill. We have a screenshot of that coming up. The New World Order is, you'll find it written in Latin. It's inside the ribbon below the pyramid there. And it says Novus Ordo Seclorum. The word novus means new. The word ordo means order. The word seclorum means secular or world. New World Order. So there it is right on the back of our dollar bill. And how did it get there? It's been there since 1935. It was put there by U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Roosevelt dreamed of building a one-world government system, and he was the driving force behind the establishment of the United Nations, which was established in 1945. So that shows the background on the term New World Order. We're not just dealing with any world government. We're dealing with the world government prophesied for the end of the age in the Bible. Amen. And it's the world government over which the Antichrist will rule. Now let's look at this prophecy of world government in Scripture. There's actually several, but let's go to Revelations 13:1. There it says there, I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. Now, if you remember, the last lesson we talked about the United States discovered in the Bible in Daniel chapter 7. And you probably recognize some of the same symbols here in Revelation 13. But there's a huge difference now. Notice this beast has the body of a leopard, the feet of a bear, the 10 horns of the 10-horn kingdom, and the beast has 7 heads. So we have 4 beasts in Daniel 7. We have 1 beast in Revelations with 7 heads. Now, notice while we're here that the dragon gave him his power, his seat, and great authority. Now, the symbols in Daniel are the same symbols in Revelations, but in Daniel, the beasts are 4 separate beasts, like I'd mentioned. Now, these 2 books were written 650 years apart. The book of Daniel was written in 550 BC. In Daniel 7, Daniel saw a beast with a lion with eagle's wings. He saw a second beast as a bear, a third beast as a leopard with 4 heads, and then a fourth 10-horned beast. Then in Revelations, which was written 650 years later, in about 95, 96 AD, John sees the exact same symbols from Daniel 7. Now this explanation is simple. The same author inspired both books. He just used different writers. The Bible teaches us that when writing the scriptures, holy men of old wrote as they were moved by the Holy Ghost. God is the author of the Bible, so it is not surprising that the same symbols would show up in these prophecies 650 years apart. Now, Revelation 13 merges these 4 beasts from Daniel 7 into 1 beast. We learned from the previous lesson that in Daniel 7:23 that the beast represents a kingdom or a nation. We also learned that the 4 beasts would be a kingdom or a nation that would exist at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. Therefore, this merged beast in Revelation 13 is the beast that represents a one-world government system. Now notice the absence of the eagle's wings and the absence of the wings of the fowl in Revelation 13 is not there. In Daniel 7, the wings of the eagle were on the back of the lion, and the wings of the fowl were on the back of the leopard. So how do we explain this? We cannot be 100% certain, but there's a couple possible explanations. Prophecies foretell a great world war is coming. We've talked about this. It's going to kill 1/3 of mankind, and this prophecy is found in Revelations 9:13 through 21. The United States will participate in that war. So it is possible that the United States could sustain major casualties and lose 25, 50 million people, become a non-factor on the world stage, or the U.S. could simply pull out of this war. Then there's a possibility that the United States could pull out of the United Nations and stand with Israel all the way to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Why do we think that? Well, Revelations 12:14. It states, "And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she may fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for times, and half a time from the face of the serpent." Now, the woman in this chapter is Israel. The times, and half a time is referring to the 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation. And we choose to believe that the eagle's wings symbolize the United States, and that we will stand with and protect Israel all the way to the end. Now, how do we spell Jerusalem? Jerusalem. The U.S. has protected Israel with their veto power 41 times since 1972. There's 608 million Jews in the U.S. and 6.2 in Israel. So we have actually more Jews here than in Israel. So do you really think the United States isn't going to stand with Israel all the way to the end? I think there's a big possibility. Now, this combined beast from Revelation 13 represents the end-time government of the Antichrist. The United Nations is the only structure that is specifically designed to be a one-world government system. We frequently hear the words globalization and New World Order. Are these a good thing or bad thing? Well, Revelation 13:2 tells us that the dragon gave him his combined seat, this combined beast, his power, his seat, and great authority. And then Revelation 12:9 explains that this dragon is the old serpent, the devil, and Satan. Therefore, Satan is going to give this end-time one-world government its power, its seat, and its authority. The one-world government, the globalization process, and New World Order that is forming now is of the devil. Satan is inspiring it. It is not a good thing at all. So we can see people time and time again letting Satan influence their opinions and beliefs because they don't understand the prophecies of the Bible. Now, Revelation 13:3 says, "I saw one of its heads as it were wounded to death." And according to verse 1, the beast has 7 heads. Verse 3 continues, "I saw one of its heads as it were wounded to death, and the deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. What do the 7 heads represent? Well, they represent the perfect combination of the 4 beasts in Daniel 7 without the eagle. 1 head is the lion, the second is the bear, and there are 4 heads of the leopard and 1 head of the 10-horned kingdom, 10-horned beast. Now all the nations, Great Britain, Russia, Germany, and the revived Holy Roman Empire, which is presently known as the European Union, will form the end-time one-world government of the Antichrist, the New World Order. Now, also notice in Revelation 13:3 it says, all the world wondered after the beast. The entire world will wonder after the New World Order, this one-world government beast, and most people will believe this is the greatest thing that has ever happened. So why do we think that the United States could possibly not fall under this one-world government? Well, we know Israel isn't going to fall, otherwise they wouldn't be invaded at Armageddon. We also know Jordan's not going to be under the rule of the Antichrist. In Daniel 11:44, and I don't have this for the screen, but it says there, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. This lets us know that there's going to be nations that do not pledge allegiance to the one world government. However, most of the world will. Absolutely. Now in Revelation 13:5 we read, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. So this 7-headed 10-horned beast is going to be given a mouth. From other scriptures we know the mouth to be the mouth of the Antichrist, the one world leader who will rule for a very short time before the second coming of Jesus Christ in the battle of Armageddon. Now verse 5 also says, and power was given unto this beast, and the mouth that spoke great things to continue 42 months. The reign of the Antichrist will be 42 months, or 3.5 years. 2 Thessalonians 2:3-4 says the Antichrist will be revealed. We've talked about this before. When he stands on the Temple Mount claiming to be the ultimate authority. The Bible calls this the abomination of desolation. And Jesus Christ said at the abomination of desolation is when the reign of the Antichrist begins. The abomination of desolation occurs 42 months before the Battle of Armageddon and the second coming of Christ. Now, based on these verifications, we know that Antichrist's reign will be 3.5 years. And though that doesn't seem like a very long time, it'll be a time of horrible tyranny, and it will seem a lot longer than it is. His reign will be short, but terrible. Jesus said in Matthew 24:21, it will be a time of great tribulation, such as never has been before. This time of the Antichrist reign will be worse than Hitler's Holocaust and the Crusades of the Middle Ages. Now notice this beast in Revelation 13 has 7 heads, but the mouth of a lion. The number one obstruction to world government throughout history has always been the language barrier. The Babylonian people in the Old Testament wanted to build a one-world government. They started building a great tower into the heavens, but God stopped them by confusing their language. God did not favor their one-world government. Now, ultimately, there was going to be a one-world government, but it's going to be a government set up and ruled by Jesus Christ. When anyone other than the Prince of Peace, Jesus Christ, rules a one-world government, it will usher in a time of horrible tyranny. The Antichrist will be the most corrupt individual that has ever ruled in this world. Now, this 7-headed beast with the mouth of the lion represents the process of globalization in the New World Order. This New World Order includes the implementation of one language. Can you guess what that language is? The global language of the New World Order is English. Pilots who fly international flights are required to speak English. Telephone operators who handle international phone calls must speak English. When Kofi Annan was UN Secretary General, he stated this: the world community has made the decision that English is the global language. English is also the language of the internet. Now, this was written over 2,000 years ago. Almighty God inspired these prophecies and revealed to us the language of the end-time one-world government. What an incredible prophecy, but it shouldn't be no surprise, right? The Bible teaches us the hairs of our head are numbered. He knows our down sittings and our uprisings. And God has told us throughout these prophecies that the global language of the end time would be the mouth of the lion. The lion is England. The language is English. This prophecy has already been fulfilled. Now, the United Nations is the only structure for a one world government. Now, what is the origin of the UN? Well, we've briefly talked about this in Lesson 1, but I'm going to repeat myself. World War I, also called the Great War, was the worst war the world has ever known. And then prior to this war, there'd never been a war with a million casualties. World War I resulted in 8.2 million dead, and the world said never again. So it was from this idea they established a structure for global security was birthed. The structure was called the League of Nations. Now, the League of Nations was formed in an attempt to ensure another world war would never be fought. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson championed this idea, but U.S. Congress hesitated at the idea of being a part of a world government. So if they did it once, they can do it again, right? They did not want to surrender U.S. sovereignty, so they voted against it. Because Wilson could not carry his own government into the League of Nations, it quickly dismantled and fell apart. Then we have 20 years later, we have World War II, 52 million casualties, and the cry for world security became louder than ever. Franklin D. Roosevelt believed in this, so he was responsible for the term New World Order being printed on the back of our dollar bill. So you can see that once the sixth trumpet or World War III happens, that people are going to be looking for somebody, and it's going to usher in the Antichrist. It's just going to be what's going to usher him in. Now, at the end of World War II, Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt came together at Yalta in an effort to end all war. And it was during these meetings that the charter for the concept of global government structure called the United Nations was written. Now, there was a key American man that was responsible for the formation of the United Nations called Alger Hiss. He organized the American delegation and served as the acting Secretary General at the first UN meeting. Hiss also served as the steering and executive committee and was charged with the responsibility of actually writing the charter. After playing such a dominant role in developing the charter of the UN and the founding conferences, 3 years later, he was convicted in U.S. courts of lying to cover up activities as a communist spy. Now, previous to this, Hiss accompanied President D. Roosevelt at Yalta's conference when the carving up of Europe by the United States and Russia took place. Now, at this time, Roosevelt was a dying man, so consequently, Alger Hiss carried the bulk of the negotiations for America. So what Russia did not win on the battlefield, she won at the peace table because her own agent, Hiss, was responsible for assisting Roosevelt with the negotiations. So this explains why Russia received so many concessions at the peace table at the end of World War II. Now, Hiss also designed the United Nations to be a global union of socialist republic. The emblem of the Soviet Union, you see there on your left, I believe. Yeah, your left. Is two sheaves with wheat around it, with a hammer and sickle superimposed. The emblem of the United Nations is also a globe with two olive branches around it. When the insignia of the United Nations was designed, the hammer and sickle was left off because including it would be too obvious. Now, however, Hiss designed the structure of the United Nations to ultimately become a world socialistic government. Now, Hiss went on to prison, but the UN continued to be a structure for one world government system. Now, on September 12, 2012, the Council of Foreign Relations published an article titled "The United Nations and the Future of Global Governance." They contended the original United Nations Charter, which you now know was penned by a convicted communist spy, was the solution to the conflicts of the world. Listen to a few excerpts from this article. The diplomatic challenge: states must strike the right balance between self-determination and stability. Conflicts where states fight for territories are vanishing. Most armed violence now arises from populations claiming the same territories and or new regimes coming into power. Therefore, the world must be governed as a whole. The UN is necessary mediator for this global management. The sovereign state is reshaped both internally and externally. The order is governed by a universal social contract, governed by the UN. There is no other way to transform the jungle of states into society. Now, three things are necessary to ensure successful global governance. We must balance world powers, garner regional support, and foster trust. As we adapt to emerging global threats, let's not lose sight of what we have achieved. The UN has largely fulfilled the chartered goals established in San Francisco 67 years ago, and in doing so has spawned an extensive body of international law, treaties, norms, practices, and institutions that govern most facets of interstate relations. With these apps, the UN Charter has become the world's central operating system, the motherboard of global governance, making it possible for ideas such as Millennium Development Goals to become policy drivers. And if you didn't know, the Millennium Development Goals expired this past year, and the new Sustainable Development Agenda was unanimously adopted by 193 UN members. And if that just flew over your head, it's okay. You can go home and Google this, Millennium Development Goals or New Sustainable Development Agenda, and you can read all about it. It talks about the UN. Now, the UN Sustainable Development Goals included 17 specific goals with 169 targets. Goal number 16 is devoted to making all nations more accountable, with one of the targets seeking to broaden and strengthen the participation of developing countries into the institutions of global governance. And this was just this past year. Folks, the United States, from its inception until now, has always been a socialistic world government. Now, back to Revelation 13:3, it says, I saw one of its heads that was wounded to death, and the deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Now, in order to understand this, let's identify which of the 7 heads was wounded unto death, how it was healed, and how it became the New World Order. After the United Nations was formed in 1945, everything did not work out as planned because the Soviet Union received much of Europe as a result of Yalta and the result of Alger Hiss's actions. There was a lot of tension. For a while, it appeared as if Russia would end up dominating all of Europe and communism would dominate Europe as well. So to keep this from happening, the United States of America led the Western powers into NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO was the military alliance to counter the Warsaw Pact, the communist bloc of Eastern Europe. And as a result, the UN was rendered largely ineffective due to the Cold War. Now, the United States was given veto power at the formation of the United Nations. The members of Congress were unwilling to approve a world government structure unless the U.S. had absolute veto power. So when the U.S. got veto power, Great Britain, France, China, and the USSR demanded veto power as well. All of these victor nations after World War II was given veto power. They formed the Big Five, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. They could veto almost anything this world government structure decided to do. Now notice what else it says in Revelation 13:3. It says there, I saw one of its heads wounded to death, and the deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So this is not saying the beast or the Antichrist was killed and rose again, as many believe. It's saying one of the 7 heads of the beast was wounded to death. The only way for us to know which head was wounded or what the deadly wound was is for us to know what the heads are. So let's review. The heads of the beast from Daniel 7 were merged into one beast with 7 heads in Revelation 13. The beast from Revelation 13 represents the world government. There was 1 head of the lion, 1 head of the bear, 4 heads of the leopard, and 1 head of the 10-horned beast. So which of these heads was the one that was wounded to death? You guys like this history lesson so far? All right, we got a little bit more to go here. World War II, the Allies, Russia, Great Britain, and the United States of America had determined something to be wrong with Germany. They were concerned that Germany's history of always plunging the world into war. So to ensure this would never happen again, they split Germany in half. They created East Germany, placing it under the Communist and Soviet Union sphere of influence. They created in West Germany, placing it under the Allied sphere of influence. By doing this, they created 2 separate German nations, reducing Germany's population and financial muscle to the point they were no longer a threat to world peace. Now, when this happened, news headlines screamed, Germany is dead. She will never rise again. When the communist reality set into East Germany and into Eastern Europe, the Eastern European people wanted to get out from under the communist rule. As a result, people fled to West Germany and Western Europe. Now, on August 14th, 1961, the Soviet Union built the Berlin Wall, a 29-mile wall that divided East Berlin from West Berlin. They also established the Iron Curtain and placed lookout points throughout Europe, separating East Europe from Western Europe. Now, in the middle of the raging Cold War, the front cover of the March 29, 1968 edition of Life magazine, this headline says, 3.5 superpowers to rule the world. article was written by George W. Ball, who at the time was the Deputy Secretary of State for the United States of America. He stated this: "In this time, when there is enough nuclear weaponry to destroy all human, plant, and animal life off the earth 25 times over, discussing the divisions causing the tensions, he said, somehow we've got to find a global structure that will get rid of all these terrible conflicts that threaten to blow up all of mankind. He proposed in this article that 3.5 superpowers would rule the world, and his 3 powers were the United States, Soviet Union, Europe, and Japan would be the half power. He said if these 4 powers would get together, they can ensure the borders where they are. We would not tolerate any borders ever being moved again, and we would not let little third-rate powers pull 2 nuclear superpowers into conflict and threaten to destroy the world." In the article, Ball continued discussing Germany and the division of Europe and the Iron Curtain, and in particular, the division of Germany and the Berlin Wall. And on page 89, he referred to the Berlin Wall as the wound. He said, "Where the division that festers like a rusty knife wound must someday be healed." Think about it. The Bible prophesies that one of the heads or nations would be wounded and then healed. The healing of the wound was the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, and is referring to Hitler's Third Reich. Now there's the First Reich, the Second Reich, the Third Reich, and now the Fourth Reich, which is rising right now. We know the beast in Bible prophecy represents a nation or kingdom. Multiple heads on a beast represent the number of times the kingdom will rise and fall. So based on this information, the third head was the one that divided when Hitler's Third Reich was cut in half. And the deadly wound is healed, the world would wonder after this world government beast. Now, as a result of this understanding of biblical prophecy, Irvin Baxter began to teach us in 1968 that the Berlin Wall would come down, and this event would be the catalyst that would launch us into New World Order. He taught us all the way up to 1986. It was at this time that he published his first book, A Message for the President, and included all this information, including that the Berlin Wall would come down. No one else believed the Berlin Wall would come down. Yet 3 years later, on November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall, in fact, did come down. The only way we would know all this information was because of biblical prophecy. Now, this is one of the reasons why I follow End Time Ministry so close, is because of Irvin Baxter's proven credibility on this prophecy. On the 21st anniversary celebration of the building of the Berlin Wall, on August 14th, 1986, edition of USA Today, there was an article that was titled, "Berlin Wall, West is Somber, East is Festive." The Berlin Wall's 25th anniversary Wednesday spotlighted its unique role as a stark symbol of East-West differences, the bricks and mortar of propaganda, the 29-mile wound that won't heal. On November 9th, 1989, the day the Berlin Wall did in fact come down, was an incredible day. People danced on top of the wall. People broke pieces for memory's sake. The people from slavery of communist Eastern Europe came pouring across the border. And the people from West Germany met them and gave each of them coming across $600 spending money. People partied and celebrated. Now, in November 20th, 1989 edition of Time magazine, there was an article titled "Wall of Shame" from 1961 to 1989, stated the most palpable evidence was of a deep wound in European civilization, and it is finally gone. 2,000 years ago, Revelation 13 called the division of the third head of the leopard a wound that just won't heal. It was a deadly wound, and the deadly wound was healed. What happened when the deadly wound was healed? The New World Order was birthed at this time. It happened quickly. Mikhail Gorbachev, George Herbert Walker Bush, and Pope John Paul II. Within 20 days of the fall of the Berlin Wall, they met together at Malta. When they came out of these meetings, they announced the birth of the New World Order, November 30th, 1989. Now, while serving as the Secretary of Defense of the United States under George Bush, Dick Cheney made an interesting statement. In the September 29th, 1991 issue of Indianapolis Star, in his explanation concerning why there was a treaty signed to reduce weapons, he said, "There is a good reason to take these steps now. the world is in a new era of promise that started 2 years ago with the collapse of the Berlin Wall. He was referring to the birth of the New World Order. Another example, November 9th, 1999, Merrill Lynch, in an attempt to advertise their financial services, published this statement. The world is 10 years old today, they said. It was born when the wall fell in 1989. It's no surprise that the world's youngest economy, the global economy, is still finding its bearings. The intricate checks and balances that stabilize economies are only incorporated with time. Many world markets are only recently freed, governed for the first time by the emotions of the people rather than the fist of the state. From where we sit, none of this diminishes the promise offered a decade ago by the demise of the walled-off world. The spread of free markets and democracy around the world is permitting more people everywhere to turn their aspirations into achievements. And technology, properly harnessed and liberally distributed, has the power to erase not just geographical borders, but also human ones. It seems to us that for a 10-year-old, the world continues to hold great promise. In the meantime, no one ever said growing up was easy. In Time magazine, 1992, Mr. Strobe Talbot stated in his article titled The Birth of the Global Nation that in the 21st century, national sovereignty as we know it would cease to exist. We would all answer to a single global authority. And we have a clip of him being interviewed. We're going to watch that right now.
Also, just say a word of acknowledgement first to the council. It's great to be back here. I love this institution. It's been a terrific part of my education over the decades.
You're right that there's always been and always will be a tension, sometimes creative, sometimes destructive, between, on the one hand, the concept of an international community that recognizes interdependence as a fact and collective governance as a necessity, and on the other, the appeal of a national community that thinks of itself as independent and sovereign. How can people who believe, as you do, and broadly put, those voices in the Democratic Party, or voices we associate more with the Democratic Party, talk about global governance without setting off alarm bells that the one-worlders and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission are all coming for them to get both their guns, their Bibles, and still turn it into a one-world government? What is the vocabulary of global governance that is politically and culturally most appealing?
Or to put it differently, why is global governance almost a no-no phrase for those who want to avoid political radiation poisoning in our debate? I actually did a little bit of research on the web and elsewhere about this, and I was interested to discover that the phrase global governance is assiduously avoided. Global governance is a phrase which is used quite commonly in the curricula of universities all around the world and publications and that kind of thing. I certainly learned very quickly, including the hard way, to avoid it when I was in the State Department, even though I was working for a president who was a liberal internationalist. And it does still have this association with the whir of the rotors of the black helicopters getting ready to land in our schoolyards and so forth and so on. World government obviously suggests that you've got a single capital somewhere and a single flag and presumably a single national anthem, and the sovereignty of all other nations is subordinated to that. And by the way, Harry Truman did believe in this, a federation of the world and the parliament of man. And that is a dream that some still entertain for the future. But global governance, in the sense that I think the phrase is properly used, is not a dream, it's a reality. And we've had it for a long time. And in the modern age, i.e. now, we have global governance in lots of forms. And some of them are associated with the United Nations, others are associated with the WTO, the World Health Organization, and there's regional governance. It's just a fact of life. So I see global governance as nothing more or less than a way of collectively, as sovereign states, managing the fact and the ongoing process of globalization and the fact of international.
So you notice what he said when he said we have a single capital somewhere, a single flag, and presumably a single national anthem. And then he goes on to say that it's more or less a fact of life. So who is Mr. Strobe Talbott? He worked in the Clinton administration for 7 years. He was Bill Clinton's roommate when they both were Rhodes Scholars in London, England. Now he is the president of the Brookings Institute. And Susan Rice, who was President Barack Obama's foreign affairs advisor, worked under Strobe Talbott at the Brookings Institute. This man who believes in a one-world government. Susan Rice was tapped by President Obama to be our ambassador to the United Nations. We are watching world government, globalization, world trade, World Bank, World Health Organization, World Criminal Court. We are watching a one-world government right now. Now, Pope Francis called for global political authority to manage this global warming and climate change hoax. Of course, the Pope's encyclical was strategically published just a few months before the United Nations Climate Summit to be held in Paris, France last year, November 30th to December 11th. Climate change is the United Nations' established hoax to redistribute wealth from developed to underdeveloped countries. Now, if God can create the heavens and the earth, and he can put the earth just the right amount away from the sun without us burning up or freezing to death, I think he can handle climate change. So remember, the United Nations was established to be a socialistic world governing body and one of the major planks of socialism and wealth redistribution. Now, furthermore, in a recent speech at the United Nations, President Obama pledged his support for the United Nations as a world governing body when he stated this: "This institution was founded because men and women who came before us had the foresight to know that our nations are more secure when we uphold basic laws and basic norms and pursue a path of cooperation over conflict. And strong nations, above all, have a responsibility to uphold this international order." The United Nations was established to be a one world governing body. A world government was prophesied about in the Bible, and you're watching it come to pass right now. Without biblical prophecy, we'd have no way of knowing what is coming next. Now, we have a few questions to go over, and that'll conclude our lesson. What is New World Order? Well, it's world government the Antichrist will rule over. What does the Latin phrase novus ordo seclorum mean? It means New World Order. It's on the back of our dollar bill. Who put the phrase there? 1935, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, what is the difference between the beast in Daniel 7 and Revelation 13? We have separate beast in Daniel 7, and the eagle's wings are missing in Revelation 13. How many years was the book of Daniel written before the book of Revelations? 650 years. Who is the dragon? It's not China. China's not mentioned in the Bible, by the way. Revelations 12:9 says, "And the great dragon was cast out, the old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." When will the Antichrist be revealed? At the abomination of desolation? Where is the United Nations headquarters located? Does anybody know? All right, we got some people who know. New York City. Who wrote the charter for the United Nations? Alger Hiss. What are the 7 heads of the beast in Revelation 13? Head of a lion, head of a bear, 4 heads of a leopard, and 1 for a 10-horned beast. Which head of the beast in Revelation 13 was wounded? Germany, which was one of the heads of the leopard. When was the deadly wound healed? The fall of the Berlin Wall. And when did the Berlin Wall come down? November 9th, 1989. And is this New World Order something years away, or is it forming right now? It's already formed. Thank you. Pastor Steve.
Okay, if that